Hello and welcome everyone to the Art of Healing with your hosts, Dr. Judy Jasek of Animal Healing Arts and Matt Rowe of ParsleyPet. During our show, we are talking about your pet's health, raw feeding, and alternative treatments for cancer, unexplained illnesses, and supporting your pet's natural ability to heal. Welcome, Dr. Judy, to this week's show.
Hey, Matt, great to be here as always.
This is actually going to be a very well-timed show. I mean, because we are talking about keeping your pet healthy this spring and avoiding. Now, the spring's coming. I mean, we're talking about fleas are coming out. We're talking about ticks. We're talking about possible incidences of heartworm. And all of that comes with its own set of drugs that they want to give your dog. So talk to us about that. Like, what drugs should I give my dog? Which drugs shouldn't I give my dog? What should I avoid at all costs? And how do I keep them safe this spring?
Yeah, so I really wanted to talk about this because a lot of people, I find, do spring maintenance. That's the time they get their pets in for their wellness visits and, sometimes get vaccines, which I think we've talked about that. So we need to be judicious about vaccines. But then there's all these other things that come up in the summertime, like heartworm disease, which is spread by mosquitoes. Now, here in Colorado, I don't think there's too many mosquitoes around because we just got a couple of feet of snow, but other areas, people are tuning in from warmer parts of the world. They might have some mosquitoes. Fleas and ticks are, can become a bigger problem in the spring and summertime. So I think it's important to be aware of these risks, but then understand like what's the best way to really protect your pet. And I think most importantly, what's really necessary. I mean, I see so many pets here in Colorado that are put on these preventatives for heartworm and flea and tick year round. Like there's absolutely no reason, for that except, to sell something really is really why it's done. Because if you look at heartworm, for example, so heartworm is spread by mosquitoes, and heartworm disease cannot be spread directly dog to dog. So that's another important thing. I think a lot of times people hear the word worm and they think intestinal worm. And yes, intestinal worms do exist. But this particular worm, it's called heartworm because this worm lives in the vessels around the heart. So it's in the bloodstream. And it's spread by mosquitoes. And so you also have to be really careful about the statistics because you'll hear, heartworm cases are on the rise in Colorado. Need to protect your dog. Fear, 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 right? And then bye. How do I protect my dog from that? Well, what you need to remember is we get a lot of rescue dogs from other parts of the country. We're getting a lot from Texas now. And Texas is a much warmer climate. Stray dogs in Texas that are unprotected, perhaps immunocompromised, they're not on good nutrition, they're going to be more susceptible to heartworm. So we're going to see more dogs coming into the state testing positive for heartworm. But it's not spread dog to dog. It still needs to go through the mosquito. So then we need to look at the actual life cycle of the heartworm. So the way a dog gets heartworm, can't go dog to dog. So a mosquito bites an infected dog. That mosquito or the heartworm larvae goes through a life stage in the mosquito that requires a temperature of 57 degrees or above for 30 consecutive days. So this is why we have so little heartworm disease in Colorado. Number one, we don't have a ton of mosquitoes. Number two, we're a dry climate, so our nights get cool. So the only time of the year here that we might get 30 days where the temperature never goes below 57, July and August, maybe. June and September, our nights are cooling off. So just in those really, really hot summer months, that's the only time that heartworm is a real risk here in Colorado. And that's if your dog has a lot of mosquito exposure. So my little indoor dogs, I don't give them heartworm prevention. I think the dogs that might be at a little higher risk are dogs that go swimming, people that have retrievers that love to get in the water. So they're going to ponds and lakes where there's more standing water. Not that you shouldn't do that. That's a great thing to do, great activity. But they might be a little more mosquito risk. So you might want to give them a couple doses of the preventative during those really warm summer months. But that's it. You do not need to be giving these year round. I do hear another thing that happens with these heartworm preventions is they keep adding things to them. It's, HeartGuard Plus or HeartGuard Max. Or so what they do is they have the ivermectin, which is the standard drug that's used for the heartworm, to prevent the heartworm. It actually kills the larvae. And then they'll add other antiparasitics, so to treat general intestinal worms. Some of the formulations have something to treat tapeworm. Don't give that stuff to your dog unless you know it needs it. Get a fecal, if you're concerned about intestinal parasites, get a fecal sample every year. And I do recommend heartworm testing every spring because I like this minimal approach to treating dogs. But I still think it's a good idea to test them in the spring, because if something changes, I'm making recommendations based on what I've seen so far in this area. But if something changes, the testing's the only way we're going to know that. So I do like to run those heartworm tests every spring. That would be a valuable spring maintenance thing to do, and just to make sure that your dog hasn't picked it up. If you travel to other areas of the country where it is warmer, more moist, like Texas, southern states, even the Midwest in the summertime, the night it's more humid, so the nights stay warmer. So if you go on a trip, go someplace like that, you're worried about heartworm, you can give your dog a dose of the preventative when you get back. Now, another thing that eliminates the chemicals completely. So that's minimizing the doses, which is good, because at least your pet is not getting them month after month after month. The body has many months of the year to recuperate and detox if they're on a healthy diet. A lot of pets will do okay with that regime. Going one step further and even further minimizing the chemicals would be to use like an essential oil repellent. And you can buy these pre-made, like at natural grocery stores, or you can put together your own. You can buy just a little spray bottle, put some distilled water in it, and then put in like some citronella, eucalyptus, peppermint, these real strong smelling essential oils. And you just spritz that on your dog before they go outside. You do need to do it every day. But if you're in a very buggy area, I think this is a great alternative to the chemicals. And I especially like this approach to avoid fleas and ticks, because the flea and tick preventatives are way harsher than the heartworm preventatives. These are pesticides. They're neurotoxins, literally. And these spot-ons, like we were talking about, you put them on the back of your dog's neck, and it's absorbed into the skin, and it's there in the body for a minimum of 30 days. Now, it could even be in the body longer, depending on how long it takes your dog to detox. And these are harsh chemicals. I hear a lot of stories about dogs getting sick after these. And yet I talk to so many people, their dogs get them month after month after month, and they're giving them, there's oral formulations for these now too, which is just so hard on the microbiome. You think you're putting a known pesticide right into your dog's gut. We talk so much about building a healthy microbiome and keeping these healthy bacteria growing. Well, what do you think is going to happen when you put a pesticide in there? You're going to be killing off a whole bunch of bacteria, and you could get an overgrowth of a pathogenic bacteria, one that can actually cause disease. So I know, in some parts of the country, like fleas and ticks are a real problem. It's here in Colorado, it's just not that big of a problem. It's ridiculous to use those preventatives here in Colorado. If your dog does end up with fleas, or you find ticks on your dog. Usually the ticks are very spotty. There's just certain areas that, like in the mountains, where you might pick them up. I never hear about it on a regular basis. And
Right.
fleas, I've seen some cases of dogs getting fleas where that probably comes from wildlife. Wildlife probably brings the fleas into the yard, and they'll get them. And then we can treat those on a case by case basis, because
Sure.
fleas do live in the environment, and that's what makes fleas really tricky. So if you get a pretty bad infestation, sometimes you need to treat your house and yard and all that to completely get rid of them. But for an ongoing preventative basis, I would use the essential oils. Hands
Mhm.
down. Another step you could take to help if you're in an area where there's a lot of fleas. Um, I've had some clients that actually use diatomaceous earth on their dog. So they'll take some of the powder and actually work it into their fur. And so
Okay.
if they do get fleas on them, and diatomaceous earth kills all kinds of insects and parasites, because
Mhm.
they're little pieces of silica, so it's sharp. So when they eat those, it cuts them up on the inside, the insects.
Okay.
Not big enough to harm your dog if your dog licks
Mhm.
it off the fur. So that's another thing, you could do if you're in an area where there really were a lot of fleas, some of those simple repellents. You can also give essential oils orally. You can put some drops in a
Mhm.
little capsule with a little extra olive oil,
Right.
to dilute them a bit. And then, it's just like if you eat a lot of garlic, you're going to smell like garlic. Well, if your pet ingests these essential oils, that does become a bit of a, kind of internal repellent. They'll start to smell like those oils. And so that can help too, if you don't want to have to worry about spritzing them.
Exactly. And, let's take a step back. And when you were talking about heartworm and that it needs to be 57 degrees, the mosquito needs to bite a dog that has heartworm within it. And then that mosquito needs to find your dog and bite. So the chances of your dog actually getting heartworm from a mosquito in like an environment like Colorado, where it's probably pretty slim.
Yeah. I've
But
only seen one case, probably in the last 20 years, of a
Mhm.
dog that never left Colorado that tested positive. And this dog lived on a lake for a whole summer. So, right
There you
in
go.
mosquito breeding ground.
Right.
That's the only case I have seen in 20 years in Colorado where the dog never left. So I test positive, people that rescue dogs from other parts
Yeah.
of the country, or people travel with their dogs. Sometimes they'll bring it back. But yeah, in Colorado, and that would be, similar for all the other dry western
Mhm.
states, New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, or
Right.
even Wyoming, because it's so cold up there. I think you're going to find a similar situation.
But if we have people watching the show from like a Midwestern region, from the South, like Louisiana, North Carolina, up around those areas where they do have a lot of propensity for that, is that degree temperature, 57 degrees, when you start to see that spike above that 57 degree longer than a 30-day period, then you could treat with HeartGuard, or you could treat with another type of heartworm preventative. But then as soon as that temp drops again, stop giving it.
Right.
So you,
And you can also, people in those areas, you can also give the preventative less frequently.
Mhm.
They market it for every month, but
Yeah.
if you look at how do they come up with that, well, it all came from the company making it. So they want to make it easy. They want to give you little stickers you can put on your calendar, same day of the
Sure.
month. Make sure you give your heart guard. You could actually go out at 45. You could probably go out even 60 days, and
Mhm.
you'll still be, because if the dog gets infected with a heartworm larvae, it
Mhm.
takes quite some time for that larvae to develop into the mature worm. It's going through its growth stages in the dog. So
Yeah.
you could probably go out every 60 days on that preventative. You don't
Mhm.
necessarily have to give it every month.
And I think that's important to know, is that if we can have it to where we give our dogs a treatment like that once, twice, three times a year. So, like here in Colorado, once, in the summer, because those 2 months are the
Yeah.
big months that they get it. once every summer, and then you're good. And then you
Right.
don't have to continue to treat all summer long. In other areas that are warmer, yeah, maybe 2-3 times over the course of, the season, that where the temperature doesn't drop below 57, then yeah, 2 or 3 times, instead of giving it 12 times a year and not allowing their bodies to detoxify from what goes in. And you also talked really importantly about flea and tick. I know right now, because we got so much snow, there are no fleas. They're dormant. They are wherever they are. There are no fleas, there are no ticks, there's no anything. But as the summer comes up, I do know for my dogs, we use a natural remedy. We use essential oils and stuff like that. And before we started using them, Leo got fleas. And it was one of those things, he was itching a lot, we didn't know what to do. And then we found a good essential oil and we put it in a spray bottle, we made the mixture up, and as soon as we started spraying him with it, no more fleas. They did not survive, they did not last through something like that. Whereas I think we look at so much that we look at large companies to say, oh, you need to, give this to your dog, where I believe that chemical we put right on the nape of their neck and possibly a couple other spots, depending on the size of your dog, we, like you said, we are giving a neurotoxin to our animals that is going to last for 30 days and it doesn't leave.
Right. Yeah. And on that mosquito temperature thing, that's very specific. If there's even like one day where the temperature drops, then that could affect the development of the larvae. So it's really, I think a lot of people aren't aware of that. And it's a real important thing, to pay attention to what's in your area. Like you're saying, Matt, like, yeah, you're here in Colorado, Leo got fleas, use some essential oils, and it's a done deal. And another thing that's really important is all the things we talk about on this show to keep your pet's immune system healthy. So a healthy diet, not over vaccinating, all of those things. That I've actually talked to holistic veterinarians that practice in areas like the Midwest, where there's more mosquitoes, so more potential risk for heartworm. And I've heard them say that their patients that are super healthy, that eat fresh food diets, and aren't over vaccinated, they don't do the prevention and they don't get heartworm. Because their bodies the immune system in the body is also capable of eliminating these larvae if it's really healthy. The fleas and ticks are a little different because they're external. They're going to affect the dog externally on the skin. So that's where you need to use some sort of repellent. But, the essential oils, as you found, work great and your dog smells good.
Right. And, and they're not bringing that chemical into the house, because something that, we started to think about at home is, if I was giving a chemical that I'm putting on the nape of the neck and along their back, and then all of a sudden I'm petting them, aren't I getting that on my skin into myself?
Totally.
Through my skin? And am I not, transferring that over to me? And so really, we're not even just talking about eliminating the chemicals and, for your dog. We're like helping you eliminate the chemicals inside yourself.
Yeah, totally. Because we get exposed to plenty of chemicals that we're not even aware of, that we really can't get away from. So the ones that we can get away from and get our pets away from, it's really important that we do so.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely spot on. And so there's a lot of things that you can do, and there's a lot of areas that you can go to keep you, your family, and your pets safe as you step into summer. So what other types of things do you see now that the spring maintenance, I'm going to put it in quotes, spring maintenance is starting to enter into, we're coming into the season of it.
Yeah, well, lots of people, get their shots, not at my clinic because we minimize vaccines, but a lot of people will go in. Part of their annual checkup in a lot of people's minds is getting annual vaccines. And that's completely unnecessary in most cases. There are vaccine alternatives such as titer testing. I'm now offering no-sodes, which is a homeopathic form of vaccinating. But the truth of the matter is, if a dog's have those puppy vaccines and builds that immunity is not going to go away. and there is no need to continue to do vaccines year after year after year, except to support big pharma. But I think will do fine on their own. They don't need us to do that.
Exactly.
And it's not something I advocate.
But you said a really good point. The titer testing is that that's spelled TITER, look it up, ask your vet for a titer test. So I know Leo's due this year for rabies vaccine. So he's at his 3-year mark. I'm going to come into your office and I'm going to get a titer test well before I ever give him another vaccine. If he has the antibodies for rabies and I don't need to give it to him, well, holy cow, I just avoided introducing another chemical inside of his body. Because I know if the chemical load gets high enough and that toxic load increases, and he's getting it from the grass that he's running around and playing in, he's getting it from water that he drinks, he's getting it, well, he's not getting it from food because we feed him raw the way a dog should be eating, but they're going to get chemicals from multiple areas, from the air they breathe, all that stuff. If I can limit that, then that gives me the chances of not bringing him in for larger things like cancer. Or larger things that is going to cost me a heck of a lot more money than just a titer test.
Right. And just one other little note on rabies. Rabies does have regulations in some areas. So that's kind of up to every pet parent to check on those. And then, rabies is tricky because from a purely health perspective, I would agree. Yeah. Do the titer, don't do the vaccine. Depending on where you live, that may not be a legal substitution for the vaccine. So there's regulations. So, check on that. It's really, I don't push vaccines, obviously, but so I leave it up to the pet parents, what they're comfortable with. And of course, if, there's regulations, then that's, up to them to follow those. So little caveat there on the rabies is a little bit different. But even if, for people that really do want to keep their pet current, they want to license them, they want to do all that, but then at least you're just down to one vaccine every 3 years. And I do have a mercury-free rabies. So those are available, which just makes them a little bit safer because at least we're not introducing a dose of a heavy metal. So it's just a little less toxic to your pet. And the dogs that are otherwise on a, good, healthy diet, they eat raw, a lot of them will be able to handle that one vaccine every 3 years. That's a world of difference between getting multiple vaccines year after year after year, where your pet's body just never gets a break. And something else I want to mention before I forget, we've talked about this a lot on the show, is the other thing that starts happening is weeds start to grow and people are going to get their Roundup out. And so be really careful about where you take your dog. Start watching. When you see people start spraying, take them someplace else. Go to as natural an area as you can. I walk my dogs where there's weeds because it's pretty obvious where they spray. You go to a nice, here in Colorado, if there's a nice, perfectly groomed park with the lush grass growing, it's full of chemicals because it doesn't grow naturally here in Colorado. So I would be on the perimeter where all the weeds are with my dogs. So you really want to avoid all of those chemicals. So start to watch for that as people start to treat their lawns, spray their driveways, and public places and parks. I mean, these places are widely sprayed. I can smell the chemicals. Drives me crazy. I'll go to even some of like our open space parks that are pretty natural. There's certain species that they will spray. Here they spray thistle. And so I go to, areas where I go to hike or run and it's very natural. There's no groomed lawns, but I can still smell them smell the chemicals because they, justify it by, getting rid of these quote unquote noxious species that don't belong there, which is a whole other topic, but they do spray. So be careful, be aware of where they might be spraying and keep your dogs away from that.
So if my dog does run in that, should I wipe their paws off before they get back in the car?
Yeah, that would actually be a great idea. keep
Okay.
some, some wipes or, a little, water or rag.
Mhm.
And yeah, if you're not sure about where you're taking your dog, if there might be
Mhm.
chemical exposure. I mean, some people live in the city and it's hard to get away from it. But yeah, absolutely. Rinsing off your dog's feet can help. There's also a compound called zeolite. It's
Mhm.
Zeolite,
Yep.
that can be ingested orally that helps bind glyphosate. So if your dog does ingest it, and it's just a fine white powder. I take some myself, like a couple times a week. And it's just a nice intestinal detox. So if your dog's
Yeah.
picking up chemicals, it can help bind and remove chemicals. And doesn't have any taste or anything. It's a real super easy thing
Yeah.
and inexpensive to mix in with your dog's food a few times a week, especially in the spring and summer where people are spraying.
That is a great point. So there's stuff that you can actually buy that'll help reduce the amount of glyphosate in their system. And glyphosate is just the product of Roundup. So
Mm-hmm.
that's the actual chemical that they use to, stop weeds and all that type of stuff. So yeah, so stopping glyphosate, which has been known to be linked to lymphoma cancer,
Mm-hmm.
is a great thing to do with zeolite, and adding that a little bit to their diet a couple times a week. Thank you for mentioning that. That is huge. So yeah, with everything that our pet is going to be somewhat subject to this spring as just maintenance that we're going in, we can limit the amount that is going to actually their bodies are going to have to deal with, is I think the best way to put that is,
Yeah.
we're adding all these toxins in, to help them be healthier and live longer lives. But in some cases, they're just getting a lot of it and it can almost be too much.
Yeah. And that's why cancer, I mean, I see, you know, more and more and more cancer patients all the time. And I think
Mhm.
this is a big part of it. There's a lot of factors into what, causes cancer to take hold in a certain pet. But I
Right.
do think these environmental toxins are huge. And these, pesticides, go back to the heartworm and the flea and tick preventatives. The more
Mhm.
chemicals that your pet is exposed to, there's going to be a threshold where
Yep.
their body just can't detox. And then once the cells become toxic, that's when
Mhm.
they end up mutating into cancer cells.
Yeah.
Cancer's more like a survival mechanism. Cells get toxic,
Mhm.
they just can't make it anymore. So something mutates in them, and then they grow into, tumors and other terrible things.
Right.
So managing, that's why, I see this so many times. I see pets get their initial cancer diagnosis within,
Mhm.
3 months of a vaccine. Now, maybe the vaccine didn't directly trigger it, but I think the vaccine is a tipping point.
Yeah.
And the pet's toxic, maybe they haven't been on the best diet,
Mhm.
and then the immune system is struggling, and then you get that vaccine, the immune system just, it kind of makes the immune system go a little haywire. The immune system doesn't know what's friend or foe anymore, and then misses these abnormal cells because a healthy immune
Right.
system will be eliminating them. But when the toxic load gets high enough, the immune system just can't do it anymore. And then
Yeah.
there's that tipping point. It's the proverbial straw that breaks the camel's back.
Yeah. I mean, you talked about the threshold. I mean, we're filling the toxic bucket and it's a matter of time before it starts to
Mm-hmm.
overflow.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So thank you, Dr. Judy, for today. This was very, very just eye opening and gave us some great information about rabies and about everything that we're going to do, and the heartworm preventative, and adding chemicals and toxins to the top of our skin's pet to avoid fleas and ticks. This has been eye opening, so I want to thank you very much.
Oh, my pleasure. I love to educate, love to get the word out there to
Mhm.
hopefully create healthier pets.
That's it. We don't want them to go see. We don't want them to have cancer. We don't want them to go into
Yeah.
the vet all the time with issues. We want them to live a happy, thriving life.
Yeah, I'd like to see them as puppies and send them out the door, and
Mhm.
hopefully, don't see them for years to come, because nothing's
Amen.
coming up with them.
That's right. So you have a great day, Dr. Judy. Thank you again. And I hope everyone out there enjoys their pet and enjoys their day as much as they can.
All right. Thanks, Matt.
All right. See ya.
Bye, everybody.